The wind was a living thing out here in Blackthorn Hollow, scraping across the barren plains like a hungry wolf. Sheriff Emmett Gaines hunched his shoulders against it, his weathered face creased with worry beneath his salt-stained hat. 3 days tracking that no-account Haskell gang, and nothing to show but frost-bitten fingers. "Ain't natural. A wind that follows a man," muttered Mason, the old tracker, whose rheumy eyes could still read sign better than men half his age. They'd found Lily Parker's cabin ransacked yesterday. The schoolmarm had put up a fight before they took her. Emmett's gut twisted, remembering the blood-spattered primer books. "Trail's headin' toward Widow's Creek," Mason said, squinting at marks only he could see. Emmett checked his Colt, the metal cold against his calloused palm. He'd sworn to Old Man Parker he'd bring his daughter home. In 30 years wearing the badge, he'd never broken his word. "Mount up," he ordered, his voice carried away by the relentless wind. "Storm's comin', and we're burnin' daylight." Some promises had to be kept, even if it meant riding straight into hell itself. 3 days earlier, the wind had been just a whisper against the windows of Clearwater's one-room schoolhouse. Sheriff Emmett Gaines stood in the doorway, his breath making small clouds in the frigid air. The scene inside turned his stomach sour. Papers from torn books swirled around his boots like wounded birds. Broken desks lay scattered across the plank floor. The chalkboard where Lily Parker had been teaching the Constitution just yesterday was cracked clean through, white dust mingling with something darker on the rough boards beneath. "Mason," Gaines said quietly. "What do you make of it?" The elderly tracker crouched by the overturned teacher's desk, his leathery fingers tracing the dark stains. At 75, Mason moved slower than in his prime, but his half-Cherokee eyes missed nothing. "Blood's fresh," he said, his voice like gravel in a tin cup. "Not much of it, though." Mason picked up a torn primer book, a child's crude drawing sticking out from between its pages. A stick-figure woman in a blue dress stood beside a small square schoolhouse. She put up a fight. Brave woman, that Miss Parker. The thunder of approaching hooves drew both men's attention. Deputy Walker dismounted before his horse had fully stopped, his polished boots nearly slipping on the frost-covered ground. At 29, the young lawman still carried himself like the Boston banker's son he was, out of place in the Montana wilderness. "Sheriff?" Walker's face was flushed with cold and exertion. "Found this nailed to the telegraph pole." Gaines unfolded the scrap of paper, his ice-blue eyes narrowing as he read. "The teacher pays for your sins," he read aloud, then crushed the paper in his fist. "Haskell gang, has to be." Mason nodded, moving toward the door. "Tracks head north toward Blackthorn Hollow. 5, maybe 6 horses." Walker adjusted his too-new hat nervously. "That's Jeb Haskell's territory. His gang's been hitting settlements across 3 territories. They killed 2 marshals last month. And now they've taken Miss Parker." Gaines walked to the chalkboard where a lesson remained half erased. Lily Parker had come to Clearwater just 6 months ago, bringing books and Eastern refinement to a settlement barely clinging to civilization. Walker cleared his throat. "Sheriff, that storm front's moving in faster than expected. Telegraph operator says it's already dropped 2 feet of snow up north. We should wait for the marshal's men from Fort Harrison." "How long?" Gaines asked, his voice flat. 4 days, if they can get through it all. Miss Parker doesn't have 4 days. Mason leaned in the doorway, watching snow begin to fall. "Storm's bad medicine, Emmett. Worst in years coming." Gaines looked down at the primer book in his hands, at the child's drawing of their teacher. "I promised Old Man Parker I'd look after his daughter when he sent her out here." He glanced up, his gaze steady. "A man's word has to mean something," even these days. Mason sighed, a sound like wind through dry leaves. Figured you'd say that. He tucked his knife into his belt with deliberate care. My eyes ain't what they used to be, but I can still track in snow better than any white man. This is suicide, Walker exploded. 2 old men and a deputy against Haskell's whole gang, in a blizzard. Gaines felt the familiar ache in his shooting arm, the one that reminded him of every cold night spent in a saddle, every bullet he'd taken in 30 years wearing the badge. Walker wasn't wrong. Nobody's asking you to come, son. Outside, a small crowd had gathered. Widow Abernathy stood at the front, her weathered face pinched with worry beneath her woolen shawl. Behind her, several of the town council members murmured their disapproval. Councilman Porter stepped forward, his merchant's hands tucked into expensive gloves. Gaines, you can't risk the town's only lawmen on a fool's errand. The telegraph's down north of here. That storm's gonna cut us off completely. That girl needs help, Ed Porter, and you know it, Widow Abernathy snapped, her voice carrying the authority of Clearwater's oldest resident. Porter's face flushed. I'm just saying, times are changing. State marshals handle these matters now. Montana's joining the Union next year. And I'm still sheriff until then. Gaines stepped past the councilman toward his horse. The silver badge on his chest caught the weak winter sunlight, a relic of an era that was fading like tracks in blowing snow. Mason, gather supplies for 3 days. Walker, ammunition, and medical supplies. He turned to face the worried townsfolk. We ride in an hour. Anyone sees Haskell or his men, you bolt the doors and wait. They want me, not you. Widow Abernathy stepped closer, her sharp eyes searching his face. Why you, Sheriff? The question hung in the crisp air between them. Gaines adjusted his hat against the first snowflakes that began to fall more heavily. Wish I knew, ma'am, he said, though a cold suspicion was already forming in his gut. As he turned his horse toward the livery, Gaines caught Councilman Porter watching him with an expression he couldn't quite place. Worry, certainly. But something else, too. Something that prickled at the back of Gaines's neck like the first warning touch of the storm. The wind picked up, carrying the promise of a blizzard on its edge. By nightfall, the world would be transformed into a howling wilderness of white. And somewhere out there, Lily Parker was in the hands of men who'd already spilled blood to send Gaines a message. Time's wasting, he muttered, spurring his horse forward. Behind him, the schoolhouse stood empty and broken, its windows like dark, accusing eyes. By midday, the world had narrowed to a corridor of swirling white. The 3 riders pushed northwest along the creek bed, heads bowed against the stinging snow that scoured their faces like sandpaper. Gaines's horse snorted, its breath freezing instantly in the frigid air. The animal was struggling, each step becoming more labored as the drifts deepened. Trail's still fresh, Mason called over the wind's howl. They're pushing hard, not bothering to cover tracks. They want us to follow, Gaines replied, his mustache crusted with ice. Walker pulled alongside, his city-bred face raw with cold. Or they're just running from the law. Gaines said nothing. The young deputy had surprised him by showing up ready to ride, despite his complaints back in town. Now his expensive coat was caked with snow, but his eyes held steady determination. Storm's working in our favor, Mason said, squinting against the white glare. Haskell will have to hole up somewhere, can't risk his horses in this. A sudden gust sent a dead branch crashing down just behind Walker's horse. The animal reared in panic, nearly unseating the deputy. "Steady, son! Pull her head around!" Gaines shouted. Walker struggled, but couldn't regain control. The horse bolted 20 yards. before plunging into a drift, sending the deputy sprawling into the snow. When he remounted and rejoined them, his face had gone from red to white. "Nearly lost her there," he admitted, voice shaking from more than cold. Mason had dismounted and was examining something half buried in the snow. He held up a torn piece of blue cloth, unmistakably from a woman's dress. "Miss Parker's?" Gaines asked, though he already knew the answer. "There's more." Mason pointed to a nearby pine tree. On the bark, barely visible through the blowing snow, were 3 parallel lines carved hastily into the wood. "Cherokee sign," Mason explained, "means follow." Walker frowned. Haskell's men wouldn't know Cherokee signs. No, they wouldn't. Hope flickered in Gaines's chest, as fragile as a match flame in this wind. Lily's grandmother was Cherokee. Old Man Parker used to joke she was more Indian than the Indians. Mason's leathery face creased in what might have been a smile. "Smart woman. She's leaving us a trail." They pushed on as afternoon faded into early darkness. The storm grew fiercer, temperature dropping until Gaines could no longer feel his toes in his boots. The familiar pain in his shoulder spread down his arm. The old bullet wound never had healed right. "We need shelter, Sheriff," Walker called, his voice barely audible above the wind. "Can't track in the dark anyway. Another hour. Mason says there's an old line cabin near Cripple Creek." "If it's still standing," the tracker added. "Been 10 years since I've seen it." Gaines's horse stumbled, nearly going to its knees in a drift. As he steadied the animal, something caught his eye, a dark shape against the white. He raised a hand, and the 3 men approached cautiously. A horse lay half buried in the snow, already stiffening with cold. Nearby, slumped against a tree, was a man. Gaines dismounted, his joints protesting as he crouched beside the body and brushed snow from the frozen face. "One of Haskell's men," he confirmed grimly. Mason knelt on the other side. "Bullet to the chest. Recent." Walker glanced around nervously. "Miss Parker?" "Not likely. She was taken unarmed." From inside the dead man's coat, Gaines pulled a folded paper. His hands, stiff with cold, fumbled with it. "It's a wanted poster," he said slowly. "From 20 years back." In the fading light, they stared at a younger version of Emmett Gaines's face on the yellowed paper, scrawled across it in dark ink. "Hanging Judge." "What does it mean?" Walker asked. Gaines's face had gone as gray as the stormy sky. The past he thought buried was clawing its way back to the surface, like a corpse refusing to stay in its grave. 20 years ago, I was deputy to Marshal Colton in Deadwood," he said, his voice hollow. "We hanged a man named Frank Haskell for murdering 3 settlers." Mason's eyes narrowed. Jeb's father. Jeb was 15 then. Swore he'd see me dead someday. Walker looked between them. "So this isn't about robbing a settlement. It's about you." And Miss Parker's caught in the middle of it. The wind suddenly howled with renewed force, driving ice crystals like tiny needles into exposed skin. "Storm's getting worse," Mason warned. "We need that cabin now." They pressed on, the horses struggling through deepening drifts. Darkness fell completely, leaving only the ghostly white ground visible. The temperature plummeted further. An hour passed, then another. The line cabin remained elusive in the swirling snow. "We're lost, aren't we?" Walker's voice trembled, whether from cold or fear, Gaines couldn't tell. "Creek should be just ahead," Mason insisted. "Cabins on the north bank." But the creek, like everything else, had vanished beneath the uniform white of the blizzard. Gaines could no longer feel his feet or hands. His horse moved mechanically, head down, against the assault of wind and snow. A sudden cracking sound broke through the storm's roar. Walker's shout came too late. Gaines' horse stepped onto what looked like solid ground, but was in fact the snow-covered creek. The ice gave way with a sickening crack. Man and horse plunged into the icy water. Gaines felt the shocking cold drive the breath from his lungs as the current caught him, dragging him downstream under the ice. "Emmett!" Mason's voice sounded distant, muffled by water and snow. Gaines clawed desperately at the edge of the ice, but his numbed fingers could find no purchase. The current pulled him deeper under the frozen surface, darkness closing in as his lungs screamed for air. His last conscious thought was of Lily Parker, somewhere ahead in the storm, leaving her signs for a rescue that would never come. Above the hole in the ice, Mason and Walker dismounted, rushing toward where the sheriff had disappeared, but the swift current had already carried him away, his hand vanishing beneath the frozen surface. "Sheriff! Sheriff!" Walker's panicked shouts were swallowed by the howling wind as darkness claimed them all. Pain brought Gaines back to consciousness, the burning agony of frozen limbs coming back to life. He gasped, eyes flying open to a rough-hewn ceiling and the smell of wood smoke. "Easy now, you're half froze." A woman's face came into view, lined with age and hardship, eyes sharp as flint. She pressed a tin cup of something steaming to his lips. "Drink. It ain't good whiskey, but it'll warm your insides." The liquor burned a fiery path down his throat. Gaines tried to sit up, felt a wave of dizziness wash over him. "My men," he managed, his voice a raspy whisper. "Just you, Sheriff." The woman tucked a wool blanket around him. "River spat you out near my place. Lucky you didn't go under the ice completely." Memory rushed back. The creek, the plunge into freezing water, the darkness. Gaines looked around the small cabin. A stone fireplace blazed at one end, illuminating sparse but tidy furnishings. His soaked clothes had been replaced by a rough wool blanket, his badge and gun belt hanging from a chair nearby. "Who are you?" he asked. "Martha Blackfeather." "My husband trapped these parts 30 years before he passed. Been alone since." She spoke matter-of-factly without self-pity. "Need to find my men. And a woman who was taken—" "Storm's still raging." Martha cut him off with a gesture toward the window. "Nobody's going anywhere till morning, if then." As if to emphasize her point, something heavy slid off the roof with a muffled thump. "That's the second drift come down tonight," she said. 10 foot of snow out there already." Gaines sank back, frustration warring with the reality of his situation. Every hour lost was another hour Lily Parker spent in Haskell's hands. "You're that hanging judge, ain't you?" Martha asked suddenly. "I was never a judge," Gaines snapped, then regretted his tone. Martha seemed unperturbed. "Not what folks called you, after the Haskell business." Gaines stared into the fire, memories from 20 years ago flickering with the flames. Frank Haskell killed a family. Mother, father, 8-year-old girl. We caught him red-handed. The circuit judge sentenced him. He trailed off, then finished quietly. "Did my duty." His boy watched, didn't he? I offered to send the boy away before it happened. He refused. Said he wanted to see justice done. Martha moved to a crude wooden table where she began cutting slices from a loaf of dark bread. Only it wasn't justice to him. No. Gaines closed his eyes briefly. To him, it was just another killing. The sound of knife against wooden board filled the silence between them. "You got a story people tell about you, Sheriff," Martha said at last. "Half the territory says you're the last of the real lawmen. Other half says you're just a killer with a badge. And what do you say? Martha handed him bread and jerky. I say a man who'd risk freezing to death for a school teacher ain't all bad. Her weathered face remained impassive. Eat? You'll need your strength. The cabin door rattled in a gust of wind that found its way through the chinking between logs. Gaines accepted the food, though his appetite had fled. His mind was on Mason and Walker. If they'd found shelter, if they were still alive, and on Lily Parker, whose fate rested in his frozen hands. Haskell wants me, not her, he said. He's using her as bait. Then he'll keep her alive, at least until he gets you. It was cold comfort, but the only kind available. Gaines forced himself to eat, knowing he needed strength for what was to come. I know these hills better than most living souls, Martha said, settling in a chair across from him. Come morning, if the storm breaks, I can point you toward Blackthorn Hollow, likely where they're holed up. Why would you help me? 20 years back, Marshal Colton and his young deputy, that'd be you, kept the miners from burning out us half-breeds during the fever. She shrugged. Figure I still owe for that. Martha rose and moved to a trunk in the corner. She returned with something wrapped in oiled cloth. My husband's, she said, unwrapping a Winchester rifle. Still shoots true. Gaines took the rifle, checking it with practiced hands. The weapon was old, but well-maintained, its lever action smooth as silk. I'm obliged. There's more. Martha reached into her pocket. Haskell's been through here 3 days ago with his men and a woman. She dropped this when they stopped for water. She handed him a small blue hair ribbon. Gaines's heart quickened. Figured it wasn't no accident, her leaving it, Martha added. Hope flared in Gaines's chest. Lily was leaving signs where she could, fighting in her own way. The schoolteacher had more steel in her than anyone in Clearwater knew. She's alive and still has her wits about her, Martha nodded approvingly. Smart woman. She moved to bank the fire for the night. Now rest. Dawn comes early, and your path won't be easy. Gaines clutched the ribbon in his weathered hand. Tomorrow, if the storm allowed, he would find Lily Parker and end this long-delayed reckoning with Jeb Haskell. Outside, as if in answer to an unspoken prayer, the howling of the wind began to subside, promising a brief reprieve with the coming dawn. Morning broke clear and painfully bright, the storm having spent its first fury during the night. Gaines trudged through snow that reached his knees, following Martha's directions toward a ridge that overlooked Blackthorn Hollow. Every breath crystallized in the frigid air. His body ached from the previous day's ordeal, but Martha's borrowed Winchester gave him purpose. The sun climbed higher, turning the snow-covered landscape into a blinding sea of white. By midday, Gaines reached the ridge Martha had described. Below him stretched Blackthorn Hollow, a narrow valley dotted with abandoned mining claims and scattered cabins from the played-out silver strike of '79. A lone crow called from a nearby pine, the sound sharp in the crystal air. Gaines lowered himself painfully into the snow, drawing the Winchester from its scabbard. Through the rifle's scope, he scanned the hollow methodically, the metal cold against his eye. Most cabins showed no signs of life, but smoke rose from one structure near the old mine entrance, a 2-room affair with a lean-to stable attached. As he watched, a figure emerged, scanned the ridgeline, then disappeared inside again. Found you, Haskell, Gaines muttered, his breath forming a small cloud. Snow crunched behind him. Gaines whirled, rifle raised, only to find himself facing the barrel of another gun. Easy, Sheriff. It's just us. Deputy Walker stood 10 feet away, Mason's familiar figure beside him. Both men looked trail-worn and exhausted, but very much alive. "Thought you boys might have turned back," Gaines said, relief washing through him despite his neutral tone. "Thought you might have drowned." Mason crouched beside him, the tracker's movements stiff from cold. "Creek carried you away faster than we could follow. Found shelter in that line cabin after all, just half a mile upstream from where you went under. Tracked you at first light," Walker added. "Saw your trail heading this way." Having Mason's tracking skills and an extra gun would significantly improve their odds against Haskell's gang. "Haskell's down there," Gaines said, gesturing toward the valley. "Cabin by the mine entrance." Mason squinted through the bright glare. "How many?" "Counted 4, including Haskell. Probably one more inside with Miss Parker." 5 against 3, Walker calculated. Not great odds. Gaines studied the young deputy. Something had changed in Walker overnight. His Boston polish had been scoured away, leaving something harder underneath. "You did good tracking me, son." Walker shifted uncomfortably. "Wasn't me. It was Mason. Said he could follow your scent like a hound dog." "Said no such thing," Mason growled. "Just know where a man's likely to go in these hills." The old tracker surveyed the hollow below. His eyes narrowed against the sun's reflection off the snow. "Storm's not done. Just catching its breath. See those clouds to the northwest? Second wave's coming, and it'll be worse than the first." Gaines nodded. "Then we move now. Can't risk losing them in another blizzard." "What's the plan?" Walker asked. Gaines considered their options, none of them good. A frontal assault would likely get them all killed and endanger Lily. Waiting for nightfall risked the storm's return. "Mason, is there another way into that hollow? Something they won't be watching?" Mason considered a moment. "Old mine shaft might connect to that cabin. Miners used to dig right under their living quarters sometimes." Walker frowned skeptically. "That's a big might." "Only one way to find out," Mason replied with a shrug. "Mason, you and I will try the mine entrance," Gaines decided. "Walker, you stay on this ridge. If you see trouble, or if we're not out within the hour, fire 3 shots and ride for help." "I'm coming with you," Walker protested immediately. "That's an order, deputy. We need someone who can get back to Clearwater if things go wrong." The wind picked up again, carrying the first few snowflakes of the approaching second storm. "Best move now," Mason warned. "Them clouds are coming faster than I thought." As they prepared to descend, Walker suddenly grabbed Gaines's arm. "Sheriff, there's something you should know. Before we left town, Councilman Porter was acting strange. I saw him talking to a rider outside the telegraph office, a man I didn't recognize." Gaines paused. "You think Porter's connected to Haskell?" "I don't know, but it seemed important." Gaines processed this new information. Porter had been particularly vocal about not pursuing Haskell's gang. Could the town councilman be involved somehow? "Keep your eyes sharp, both of you. This whole thing stinks worse than I thought." The wind strengthened, carrying more snow on its edge. Gaines pulled his old pocket watch from his vest, his wife's final gift before pneumonia took her 15 years ago. The face was scratched and weathered like the man who carried it. 1 hour. If we're not back, get to Clearwater and bring help." He placed the watch in Walker's hand, the weight of it seeming to convey more than just time. Walker nodded, accepting both the timepiece and the responsibility it represented. As Gaines and Mason began their careful descent toward the abandoned mine entrance, the first thick snowflakes of the approaching second storm began to fall. The world was closing in again, and time, like hope, was running out. The old mine tunnel was a nightmare of rotting support beams and ankle-deep icy water. Gaines and Mason inched forward in the darkness, guided only by the faint glow of Mason's carefully shielded lantern. Water dripped somewhere ahead, the sound echoing eerily. "Shaft's been abandoned 20 years, Mason whispered. "Could come down on our heads any minute." "Encouraging," Gaines replied dryly. They'd been underground nearly 30 minutes, following the main tunnel's meandering path. Twice, they'd had to detour around collapsed sections, and Gaines was beginning to fear they'd taken a wrong turn. Then Mason froze, extinguishing the lantern. In the sudden darkness, sounds became clearer. Voices from somewhere above and ahead. "We're under the cabin," Mason breathed, barely audible. They moved forward by touch alone, Gaines's hand on the rough stone wall. The voices grew louder, and now light seeped through cracks in the wooden ceiling of the tunnel, the floorboards of the cabin above. "Don't like waiting," a gruff voice complained. "Should have been here by now." "He'll come," came the response, a voice colder and more educated than the first. "Old hanging judge wouldn't leave a pretty schoolmarm to die." A woman's voice, weak but defiant, cut through the darkness. "Sheriff Gaines will kill you all." The crack of a slap followed, then a woman's gasp of pain. "Shut your mouth," the educated voice snapped. "Your precious sheriff's probably frozen solid in a snowdrift." Every instinct screamed at Gaines to charge forward. Only Mason's restraining hand on his arm kept him in check. "Trapdoor should be near the back wall," Mason whispered. "Used for bringing up ore." They inched forward, searching the ceiling for the outline of a door. Gaines's foot struck something solid, a wooden ladder, its rungs rotted with age and damp. It led upward to a square outline barely visible in the gloom. Floorboards creaked above them as someone paced. "Porter should have been here hours ago," the educated voice, Haskell Gaines presumed, said irritably. "Something's wrong." "Maybe the storm got him," another voice suggested. "Or maybe our friend the councilman lost his nerve." So Walker's suspicions were correct. Porter was working with Haskell. The pieces fell into place in Gaines's mind, forming a picture darker than he'd imagined. The bang of a door above made them both start. "Riders coming! 2 of 'em!" a new voice announced. "Finally," Haskell responded. "Get the woman ready." Sounds of struggle followed, Lily being moved against her will. Gaines tested the ladder with his weight. The wood groaned, but held. He looked at Mason, a silent plan forming between them. "I'll go up first," he whispered. "Once I have their attention, you find Miss Parker and get her out." "And how do you plan on surviving 5 guns alone?" Gaines didn't answer, his grim expression saying what words couldn't. This was never about getting out alive. It was about keeping his promise to bring Lily home. 3 gunshots cracked in rapid succession from outside. Walker's signal. Something had gone wrong. Commotion erupted above. "What the hell was that?" Haskell demanded. "Someone's on the ridge." Their element of surprise was evaporating. Gaines started up the ladder, each rung creaking beneath his weight. Mason followed, knife drawn. Without warning, the rotten wood gave way with a crack that seemed to echo through the entire mine. Gaines lunged upward, catching the edge of the trapdoor as the ladder collapsed beneath him. Mason wasn't as lucky. "Mason!" Gaines called as the tracker fell, landing in a crumpled heap 6 feet below, his leg bent at an unnatural angle. Above, boots thundered across the floor as Haskell's men reacted to the noise. "Someone's in the mine! Check the trapdoor!" There was no time to think. Gaines heaved himself up through the trapdoor, Winchester raised. He found himself in what had once been a kitchen, now empty except for a startled outlaw reaching for his gun. Gaines fired, the rifle's report deafening in the confined space. The man dropped without a sound. The door burst open, revealing 2 more of Haskell's gang. Gaines's second shot caught the first in the chest, but before he could chamber another round, the second man fired. Pain exploded in Gaines's side as the bullet grazed his ribs. He staggered back, firing from the hip. The outlaw dropped with a gurgling cry. "Haskell!" Gaines shouted, pressing a hand to his bleeding side. "It's over." Silence fell, broken only by the wind howling outside and Gaines's labored breathing. "Sheriff Gaines!" a cultured voice called from the next room. "You're a hard man to kill. Let Miss Parker go. This is between you and me." "Oh, I don't think so. Not after all the trouble I've gone to." The door to the next room swung open slowly. Jeb Haskell stood there, a man in his mid-30s with cold eyes, and a face weathered beyond its years. One arm was wrapped around Lily Parker's throat, a revolver pressed to her temple. "Sheriff," she gasped, her face bruised, her blue dress torn and dirty, but her eyes were clear and defiant. "Drop the rifle, Sheriff, or the schoolmarm gets to meet her maker." Gaines hesitated, weighing impossible options. In that moment of indecision, a shadow moved behind Haskell. Councilman Porter, his face twisted with fear and shame. "It wasn't supposed to be like this, Sheriff," Porter blurted. "He just wanted information on gold shipments. Nobody was supposed to get hurt." "Shut up, you fool!" Haskell snarled. Lily seized the distraction, driving her elbow into Haskell's stomach and tearing herself from his grasp. Gaines raised his rifle, but Porter panicked, lunging forward. Haskell's gun barked once, and Porter fell, clutching his chest. The bullet meant for Lily had found Porter instead. The lantern shattered, spilling oil across the wooden floor. In an instant, flames erupted, fed by the dry timber. In the chaos, Haskell grabbed Lily again and retreated through the back door into the swirling snow. Gaines moved to follow, but stumbled, his wound and the smoke bringing him to his knees. 20 years I've waited for this, hanging judge," Haskell shouted from outside. "Now you burn, just like my father should have." The fire spread with terrifying speed, cutting off the doorway. Gaines crawled toward the trapdoor, thinking of Mason still trapped below, of Lily in Haskell's grasp, of all the promises he was about to break. The ceiling began to give way as Gaines reached the opening. Below, Mason lay unconscious, unaware of the death about to rain down upon him. With the last of his strength, Gaines lowered himself through the opening, falling the last few feet to the mine floor. Above, the cabin collapsed in a shower of burning timber and smoke, sealing the mine entrance and trapping them in darkness. In the sudden darkness, Gaines fought to remain conscious. The pain in his side and the smoke filling his lungs threatened to drag him under. With trembling hands, he struck a match from his pocket, illuminating Mason's still form. The old tracker's breathing was shallow, his leg grotesquely twisted. "Mason! Mason!" The tracker's eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then sharpening with awareness. "Looks like we found ourselves another problem," he managed weakly. "Can you move?" "Not with this leg." Mason grimaced in pain. "Where's the girl?" "Haskell has her. They went north." Both men fell silent, the gravity of their situation sinking in. Trapped underground, with a collapsed tunnel behind them, fire above, and a blizzard raging outside. "There's another way out," Mason said finally, pointing deeper into the mine. "Old ventilation shaft, quarter-mile in, if it hasn't collapsed." Gaines nodded, understanding what remained unspoken. He would have to leave Mason behind if there was any hope of saving Lily. "I'll come back for you." "No, you won't." Mason reached for his knife, the bone handle worn smooth from decades of use. but you'll take this, my father's blade, always finds its mark." He pressed the knife into Gaines's hand, the same knife he'd used to track countless fugitives across the Montana wilderness. "Go get her, Emmett," Mason said, his voice growing weaker. "Make this right." The wind howled distantly through some unseen passage. Gaines tucked the knife into his belt and squeezed Mason's shoulder once before forcing himself to his feet. "I'll be back," he insisted, though both men recognized the lie. Mason's lips quirked in what might have been a smile. "Course you will." With a final nod to his old friend, Gaines struck another match and moved deeper into the mine, following the faint draft that promised a way out and a final reckoning with Jeb Haskell. The ventilation shaft was almost too narrow for Gaines's shoulders, but desperation lent him strength. He clawed his way upward through the rusted iron rungs, every movement sending fresh pain through his wounded side. Blood had soaked through his shirt and frozen to his coat, cracking with each movement. When he finally emerged into the open air, the storm had returned with a vengeance. The wind screamed across the open ground, driving snow before it in horizontal sheets. Visibility had dropped to mere yards, the temperature falling with every passing minute. Gaines oriented himself using the mine entrance as reference, then set off in the direction Haskell would have taken. Through the white curtain of snow, he could just make out tracks, 2 sets, one being dragged. Lily was still fighting. "One foot," he muttered to himself through cracked lips. Then the other. Keep moving. Each breath sent daggers of pain through his chest. The cold had numbed his extremities, a dangerous blessing that allowed him to keep moving despite frostbitten fingers and toes. He thought of Mason, alone in the mine's darkness, possibly dying. Of Lily, in the hands of a man whose hatred had festered for 20 years. A distant crack split the air. A gunshot, muffled by the storm, but unmistakable. Gaines altered course, following the sound like a drowning man toward a distant shore. A second shot followed, closer now. A dark shape materialized through the swirling white. The abandoned Blackthorn Mine's main building, a 2-story structure that had once housed offices and equipment. Gaines drew Martha's Winchester, thumbing back the hammer with fingers he could barely feel. The main door hung open, swinging in the wind. Inside, footprints in dust and snow led upstairs, and blood, droplets on the wooden floor, too fresh to be anything but trouble. "Haskell!" Gaines called out, his voice rough. "It's over!" Silence answered him. He began the climb upstairs, each step an agony of effort. At the top landing, a door stood partially open, yellow lamplight spilling onto the worn floorboards. "Sheriff?" A weak female voice called from inside. "Is that you?" Gaines pushed the door open with his rifle barrel. The room beyond had once been the mine manager's office. Now it held only Lily Parker, tied to a chair, her face bruised but eyes alert. "Miss Parker." Relief flooded through him as he moved quickly to untie her. "Where's Haskell?" He heard something outside, went to check. She winced as circulation returned to her wrists. "He's been waiting for you." Gaines cut through her bonds with Mason's knife. She swayed unsteadily as she stood, clutching his arm for support. "You came for me," she whispered. "I knew you would." "We need to move, now." Footsteps sounded on the stairs below. Too late. The door flew open, revealing Jeb Haskell, snow dusting his shoulders and hatred burning in his eyes. His revolver was aimed squarely at Gaines's chest. "Touching reunion," he said, his voice cultured despite the rage in his eyes. "Drop the rifle, Sheriff." Gaines hesitated, weighing impossible odds. He was too far away to rush Haskell before a bullet found him. "He'll kill us both, regardless," Lily said quietly. "Smart girl." Haskell's smile didn't reach his eyes. "But I've waited 20 years for this moment. I want the sheriff to know why before he dies." Gaines lowered the Winchester slowly to the floor, buying precious seconds. "I know why. Your father." "My father was no saint," Haskell said bitterly. "But he didn't kill those settlers. He was framed by the mining company. They wanted his claim." Something in Haskell's voice gave Gaines pause. The absolute conviction of a son who had spent 2 decades nurturing his grievance. "What proof do you have?" "Found it 10 years back. Company ledger showing payments to the witnesses." Haskell's eyes burned with vindication. By then it was too late. Father was long dead, and you, the great lawman, had moved on. Doubt crept into Gaines's mind for the first time. He had been young then, eager to prove himself. Had he been party to a terrible miscarriage of justice? "Even if that's true," Lily said, her voice steady despite her ordeal, "it doesn't justify kidnapping and murder." "Shut up!" Haskell waved his gun wildly. "You don't get to judge me. None of you do." Gaines saw the dangerous instability in Haskell's eyes, a man pushed beyond reason by decades of festering hatred. "If what you say is true, I'll help you prove it," he offered carefully. "There are legal channels." "Legal?" Haskell laughed harshly. "Like the legal hanging of my father?" He stepped further into the room, his gun never wavering. "I wanted you to suffer like I suffered, watching someone you care about die, knowing you're powerless to stop it." He swung the revolver toward Lily. In that instant, Gaines's hand moved to Mason's knife, still clutched in his left hand. The blade whistled through air, striking Haskell's arm just as he fired. His shot went wide, splintering the window behind them. Gaines launched himself forward, tackling Haskell to the ground. The 2 men struggled, Gaines's greater experience countered by Haskell's youth and strength. Haskell's hand closed around Gaines's throat, pressing down with manic strength. The sheriff's vision began to darken at the edges, his wounded body failing him at the critical moment. A gunshot cracked through the room. The pressure on Gaines's throat suddenly released. Haskell slumped sideways, a look of surprise frozen on his face. Behind him stood Deputy Walker, his revolver still smoking. "Sorry I'm late, Sheriff." Gaines gasped for air, pushing himself painfully to a sitting position. "Thought I told you to stay on the ridge." "You did." Walker holstered his gun with a newfound confidence. "But Mason always said the difference between a live lawman and a dead hero is knowing when to disobey orders." Lily rushed to Gaines's side, helping him up with surprising strength for a woman who had endured so much. "Is he—" She glanced at Haskell's still form. "Just wounded," Walker assured her. "Bullet took him in the shoulder." "Mason," Gaines said, the name carrying all his concern. "He's still in the mine, trapped." "I know. I found the ventilation shaft after the cabin collapsed. He's hurt bad, but alive. I braced his leg best I could before following your trail." Relief washed over Gaines, tempered by the knowledge of how close they'd all come to death. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows in their frames. "Storm's getting worse," Walker observed. "We need shelter until it passes." Gaines nodded, the adrenaline fading and leaving him barely able to stand. As Walker secured Haskell with handcuffs, Lily supported the sheriff's weight. "You kept your promise," she said softly. "Not all of them," Gaines replied, looking at Haskell's unconscious form. "Not yet." If there was truth to Haskell's claims, another promise would need to be kept, one to justice itself. The ledger would need to be found, the truth uncovered, no matter how painful. "There's a storage room downstairs with a stove," Walker said, interrupting his thoughts. "We can wait out the storm there." As they moved toward the stairs, Gaines paused, looking at Walker with newfound respect. "You did good, Deputy. Real good." Walker's face colored slightly. "Learn from the best, sir." Together, the three made their way downstairs, leaving behind the ghosts of the past, at least for the moment. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but within Gaines, something had shifted. The burden he'd carried for decades felt somehow lighter, as if in saving Lily Parker, he'd begun to save himself as well. The storage room had become their refuge, a 20-by-20 space filled with rusted mining tools and forgotten supplies. Walker had managed to get the old potbelly stove working, its heat gradually thawing their frozen bodies as the blizzard screamed its fury outside. Jeb Haskell sat propped against the far wall, his wounded shoulder bandaged with strips torn from Lily's petticoat. His hands remained cuffed before him, his eyes following Gaines's every move with undisguised hatred. "Storm's not letting up, Sheriff," Walker said, peering through frost-covered windows. "We're stuck here till morning at least." Gaines nodded, wincing as Lily tightened a makeshift bandage around his ribs. His side had finally stopped bleeding, but the pain remained, a steady companion like an unwelcome friend. "Mason can't wait that long. He needs a doctor." "You can't go back out in this," Lily argued, her voice firm. "You'll freeze before you make it halfway." Haskell's laugh was cold and bitter. "Listen to your woman, Sheriff. Death's waiting out there with open arms." "She's not my woman," Gaines snapped, "and you're still breathing only because I want answers." He moved to where Haskell sat, lowering himself painfully to eye level with his prisoner. "Those papers you mentioned, the company ledger showing your father was framed. Where is it? You actually believe me?" Haskell's eyes widened slightly. "The great hanging judge having second thoughts after 20 years? Gaines said nothing, his weathered face revealing nothing of his inner turmoil. Haskell shrugged, then winced at the pain the movement caused. "It's in my saddlebag, not that it matters now." "I'll check," Walker offered, disappearing into the adjoining room where they'd stabled the horses. Lily moved closer to Gaines, her voice low. "You think he's telling the truth?" "I don't know, but if Frank Haskell was innocent—" The implication hung in the air, that Gaines had helped execute an innocent man and orphaned a boy who grew into the vengeful outlaw before them. Walker returned, papers rustling in his hands. "Found this." He handed Gaines several yellowed pages, company letterhead visible at the top. As Gaines read, his expression darkened. "Names of witnesses, amounts paid, dates." He looked up at Haskell. "All here." "Could be forged," Lily suggested cautiously. "Maybe. But there are details here only someone inside the company would know." Haskell laughed bitterly. "Told you. My father was many things, drunk, brawler, claim jumper, but not a murderer. That settler family was killed by company men to frame him. His claim had hit a rich vein." Gaines continued reading, the weight of possible injustice settling on shoulders already burdened by a lifetime of hard choices. "Even if it's true, Sheriff," Walker pointed out, "it doesn't excuse what he's done. Kidnapping, attempted murder—" "What would you have done, Deputy?" Haskell interrupted. "If they hanged your father on lies, then buried those lies so deep nobody would listen." For once, Walker had no ready answer. "The law still matters, Haskell," Gaines said quietly. "Even when it fails." Easy words from the man with the badge. Gaines folded the papers carefully, tucking them inside his coat. "If these prove true, I'll see your father's name cleared. That's my word." 20 years too late," Haskell replied, But something in his voice had changed. Not forgiveness, but perhaps the first crack in the wall of his hatred. A sudden loud thump from outside made all four freeze, listening. The sound came again, something heavy striking the door downstairs. Walker drew his revolver. Someone's out there. In this storm? Gaines reached for his rifle. The splintering of wood echoed through the building. "Haskell, you in there?" a voice bellowed over the wind's howl. "Coleman," Haskell muttered, tension evident in his posture. "Your man," Gaines demanded. "My brother-in-law. Mean as a rattler and twice as deadly." Understanding dawned on Gaines's face. "That's why Porter knew so much. His daughter married your kin." Haskell nodded. "Sarah Porter, my sister by marriage. Old man Porter didn't approve, but blood's thicker than water." Heavy footsteps sounded on the stairs. Walker positioned himself behind an overturned desk while Gaines motioned Lily to stay with Haskell. "Keep his cuffs on," he instructed her quietly. "First sign of trouble, get yourself into that back room." He took up position beside the door, Martha's Winchester ready. Outside on the landing, footsteps stopped. "Haskell, it's Coleman. Porter said you'd be here." Gaines signaled for silence. A moment passed. "We're coming in," Coleman announced. The door burst inward. Gaines swung the rifle butt, catching the first man in the face. He went down hard. A second figure appeared in the doorway, gun raised. Walker fired from behind the desk. The bullet caught the man in the shoulder, spinning him back into the hallway with a howl of pain. "There's 3 more of us, lawman," Coleman shouted from the hallway. "Send out Haskell and the woman, and maybe you live." Walker glanced at Gaines, his expression grim. 2 against 5. "I don't like those odds, Sheriff." Gaines looked at Haskell, an idea forming. "Call them off," he said to his prisoner, "and I'll personally take these papers to the territorial governor." "Why should I trust you?" "Because unlike 20 years ago, I'm listening now." Something shifted in Haskell's eyes. Not forgiveness, not even acceptance, but a calculus of survival and vindication. "Coleman," he called out. "Stand down." "The hell you say?" came the incredulous reply. "After what we went through to get here? I said stand down. That's the sheriff in there. I want him alive." Murmuring came from the hallway, Coleman conferring with his remaining men. "We didn't come all this way to leave empty-handed." "Uncuff me," Haskell said to Gaines. "Let me talk to them." Gaines hesitated, years of instinct warning against trusting an outlaw. "Do it, Sheriff," Lily urged quietly. "It may be our only chance." After a moment's consideration, Gaines nodded to Walker, who reluctantly produced the key. As the cuffs fell away, Haskell rubbed his wrists, flexing his fingers. "Smart woman you got there, Sheriff," he remarked. "Maybe you should listen to her more often." He moved toward the doorway, Gaines keeping the Winchester trained on his back. "Coleman, get in here, but holster that iron." A burly man with a frost-crusted beard appeared cautiously in the doorway, hand hovering near his revolver. 2 more figures loomed in the shadows behind him. "What's this about, Jeb?" Haskell stood straight, despite his wounded shoulder, authority emanating from him like heat from the stove. "Change of plans. The sheriff's seen the ledger. He believes it." Coleman's eyes narrowed in disbelief. "So what? We kill him and the others? Take it back." "And who's going to clear my father's name then?" Haskell countered. "Use your head." Coleman's eyes darted from Haskell to Gaines, suspicion warring with the habit of obedience. "Sarah won't like this, her daddy dead, and you making deals." "Porter got himself killed through his own cowardice," Haskell said dismissively. "Sarah will understand what matters." For a tense moment, the outcome balanced on a knife's edge. Then Coleman's shoulders slumped slightly. What's the play, then? We let them go, all of them. The sheriff takes the ledger to Helena. And you? I face the music, Haskell said with surprising dignity. Small price to pay for the truth. Gaines watched with guarded surprise. The man before him was not the mindless avenger he had expected, but something more complex, a son seeking justice by whatever means necessary. Coleman reluctantly nodded. If that's your call. We have a deal, Sheriff? Haskell turned to Gaines. You'll stand trial for Miss Parker's kidnapping and the rest. But you'll take the ledger to the governor yourself? Gaines studied the man before him, no longer the boy who had watched his father hang, but the product of a tragedy that might have been prevented. You have my word. For the first time, something like peace crossed Jeb Haskell's face. Then let's get your tracker friend out of that mine before he freezes solid. This territorial court is now in session. The judge's gavel struck wood, silencing the packed courtroom. 3 weeks had passed since the standoff in Blackthorn Hollow. Now Helena's territorial courthouse buzzed with anticipation, citizens drawn by the sensational nature of the case. At the defense table sat Jeb Haskell, clean-shaven and dressed in a suit that couldn't quite hide the outlaw beneath. The prosecutor shuffled papers with confident efficiency, clearly expecting an open and shut case. Sheriff Emmett Gaines sat in the front row, his badge gleaming against his best black coat. Beside him sat Lily Parker, her bruises healed, but the memory of her ordeal still visible in her watchful eyes. Mason occupied a chair at the aisle, his splinted leg stretched before him. The old tracker had survived, though the doctor said he might never track through mountain country again. First case on the docket, the judge announced. Territory of Montana versus Jedediah Haskell. The proceedings began with the formality of charges: kidnapping, assault, attempted murder, conspiracy. When asked for his plea, Haskell stood and spoke clearly. Guilty, Your Honor. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The judge peered over his spectacles, clearly surprised by the unexpected plea. You understand the consequences of this plea, Mr. Haskell? I do. The territorial attorney rose, satisfaction evident in his bearing. In light of the defendant's plea, the territory requests immediate sentencing. Before the judge could respond, Gaines stood. Your Honor, I request permission to address the court. The judge's eyebrows rose. Sheriff Gaines, you're the arresting officer in this case? I am, Your Honor, and there are facts the court should consider before sentencing. The attorney objected immediately. Your Honor, with a guilty plea entered, victim statements would be appropriate at sentencing, but— This isn't about sentencing, Gaines interrupted. It's about justice, past and present. The judge studied the respected lawman for a moment, then nodded. Proceed, Sheriff, but be brief. Gaines approached the bench, his boots echoing on the wooden floor. 20 years ago in Deadwood, I assisted in the arrest and execution of Frank Haskell for the murder of the Jensen family. He removed documents from inside his coat. I've since discovered evidence suggesting Frank Haskell was framed by the Black Hills Mining Consortium, who wanted his claim. As he placed the yellowed company ledger on the judge's bench, the courtroom erupted in whispers. The judge struck his gavel for order. I've spent the past 3 weeks verifying these records, Gaines continued, once quiet returned. 2 of the witnesses against Frank Haskell have signed affidavits admitting they were paid to lie. A third confessed on his deathbed 5 years ago. The judge examined the documents, his expression growing grave. And you believe this mitigates Mr. Haskell's crimes? No, Your Honor. What Jeb Haskell did was wrong. He must answer for it. But so must we answer for what was done to his father. The courtroom door opened, drawing all eyes. Governor Toole himself entered, accompanied by 2 aides. The territorial governor nodded respectfully to the judge before taking a seat. "I see the governor has taken interest in these proceedings," the judge remarked dryly. "At my request," Gaines explained, "I've petitioned for a posthumous pardon for Frank Haskell based on this new evidence." Jeb Haskell stood frozen at the defense table, disbelief warring with vindication on his face. "Did you know the sheriff was pursuing this?" the judge asked him. "He gave his word," Haskell replied simply. "I didn't know if he'd keep it." The judge studied both men, the aging lawman and the outlaw whose life had been shaped by injustice. "Mr. Haskell, your guilty plea stands. The crime of kidnapping alone carries a minimum sentence of 10 years in territorial prison." Haskell nodded, accepting the judgment without protest. "However," the judge continued, "in light of these extraordinary circumstances, I will recommend the governor consider clemency after 5 years served, provided your behavior in prison is exemplary." The governor nodded slightly, acknowledgment without promise. "Thank you, Your Honor," Haskell said quietly. "Thank Sheriff Gaines. Few men would have the courage to admit such an error." As the bailiffs came to lead Haskell away, he turned to face Gaines. Their eyes held for a moment, not forgiveness exactly, but a recognition of shared humanity across the divide of badge and cell bars. "My father would have appreciated this, Sheriff," Haskell said. "Too late for him, but not too late for the truth," Gaines finished. The crowd rose as the court adjourned. Lily approached Gaines, her expression thoughtful. "That couldn't have been easy." "Easiest thing I've done in years, Miss Parker," he replied. Truth has a way of lightening the load. Outside the courthouse, Mason waited, leaning heavily on a carved walking stick. "Governor seemed impressed with you," he observed, not looking for his approval. "No, but word is, he's looking for a U.S. Marshal when Montana gets statehood next year. Someone who knows the difference between law and justice." Gaines shook his head, gazing toward the distant mountains, their peaks glowing gold in the afternoon sun. "Been wearing a badge 30 years, Mason. Might be time to see what life looks like without one." Lily watched him carefully. "And what would that life look like, Sheriff Gaines?" Her question hung in the air between them, filled with unspoken possibility. Before he could answer, Walker approached, his step more confident than when they'd first met. "Telegram from Clearwater, Sheriff. Town council wants to know when you're coming back." Gaines looked at the faces around him, Mason's knowing gaze, Lily's quiet expectation, Walker's newfound assurance. The wind from the mountains carried the scent of pine and possibility. "Tell them I'm on my way," he said finally, "and that I've got some decisions to make when I get there." The journey back to Clearwater took 4 days. The stage, forcing its way through snowdrifts that still lingered in the shadowed mountain passes. Gaines sat beside Lily, Mason across from them, his splinted leg propped on the opposite seat. Wooden wheels creaked and springs groaned as the stagecoach rocked over the uneven terrain. Their breath made small clouds in the cold air of the carriage. "Never thought I'd miss that drafty old sheriff's office," Mason remarked, breaking a comfortable silence. "Been away too long," Gaines agreed. "Almost a month now." "Deputy Walker seems to have managed well in your absence," Lily observed. Gaines nodded, gazing out at the passing landscape. Walker had remained in Clearwater, stepping into the sheriff's duties with unexpected competence. "Boy's grown up some," Mason said. "Facing down death in a blizzard will do that." The old tracker's eyes held a knowing gleam as he glanced between Gaines and Lily. Since the trial, something unspoken had grown between the sheriff and the schoolteacher, a quiet acknowledgment of possibilities neither had expected. "The children will be eager to resume classes," Lily said, smoothing her skirt. "I've been away too long as well." "They missed you. Whole town did." "Clearwater, 10 minutes," the stage driver called from above. As they crested the final ridge, Clearwater spread below them, a collection of wooden buildings and houses nestled in the valley, smoke rising from chimneys into the crisp blue sky. Despite everything, Gaines felt a tightening in his chest at the sight. Home, for better or worse. "Look there," Mason said, pointing toward the edge of town. A crowd had gathered, people holding banners, children waving excitedly. As the stage approached, Gaines recognized familiar faces, townspeople he'd known for 15 years. "Is that a welcome?" Lily asked, surprise evident in her voice. The stage rolled to a stop amid cheers. Walker stood at the front, a smile breaking his usually serious face. Beside him, Widow Abernathy beamed with grandmotherly pride. "Welcome home, Sheriff. Miss Parker?" Walker called as the stage door swung open. As Gaines helped Lily down, Widow Abernathy rushed forward, enveloping the schoolteacher in a fierce embrace. "Lord above, we thought we'd lost you." "I'm quite well, Mrs. Abernathy," Lily assured her, emotion making her voice unsteady. Thanks in no small part to the sheriff. Children from Lily's school swarmed around her, faces upturned like flowers seeking sun. "Miss Parker! Miss Parker!" they called. Gaines watched her bend to embrace them, her joy palpable as she assured each child she was truly back. "Town council's been busy, Sheriff," Walker said quietly, stepping to Gaines's side. "They heard about your testimony in Helena. Word travels fast. They've called a special meeting for tomorrow. Something about recognition of service." Gaines frowned slightly. He had never sought recognition, had always done his duty as he saw it, nothing more. "How have things been?" "Quiet. Councilman Wright stepped in after Porter's death. More reasonable man." Walker hesitated. "And Porter's daughter, Sarah Haskell, left town, headed back east, they say." Gaines nodded, relieved that at least some wounds were beginning to heal. Mason's crutch thumped on the wooden boardwalk as he made his way toward them. "If you two are done jawing, I could use a hand with these bags." As the crowd dispersed, they walked to the sheriff's office, a simple clapboard building with "Sheriff" painted in faded letters across the door. Inside, nothing had changed, yet everything felt different. Walker had kept the place tidy and warm. On the desk lay several wanted posters and a neatly written logbook of the month's events. "You've done good work, Walker," Gaines said, genuine approval in his voice. "Just following your example, sir." Mason lowered himself into a chair by the stove, stretching his injured leg with a groan of relief. Home sweet home. Now if someone would pour a man a drink. As Walker attended to Mason, Gaines moved to his desk. His fingers traced the worn edges of the badge he'd placed there, 30 years of service embodied in a simple silver star. "May I come in?" Lily stood framed in the doorway, afternoon light behind her. "Of course." She approached his desk, her expression thoughtful. "I wanted to thank you properly, Sheriff, for everything." "Just doing my job, Miss Parker." "We both know it was more than that." Her perceptiveness caught him off guard. In the weeks since the blizzard, their shared ordeal had created a bond neither had acknowledged openly. "The school board has asked me to stay on permanently," she continued. "I've decided to accept." Something eased in Gaines's chest, a tension he hadn't recognized until it released. Clearwater needs its teacher. And its sheriff? The question hung between them, gentle but unmistakable. "Been thinking on that," he admitted. 30 years is a long time to wear the badge. And what would Emmett Gaines do without one? It was the second time she'd asked a version of that question. This time, he had an answer forming. Might build that cabin up by Silver Creek. Land's been mine for years, just never found the time. It sounds peaceful. Could be. Right kind of company would make all the difference. Their eyes met, understanding passing between them without need for further words. Lily smiled, a slight blush coloring her cheeks. The next day dawned clear and cold. The town hall was packed as Gaines made his way to the front, where Councilman Wright stood behind a simple podium. Citizens of Clearwater, we're gathered to honor Sheriff Emmett Gaines, whose courage and dedication have served this community for 15 years. Wright presented Gaines with a wooden box. Inside lay a new badge, silver like his old one, but engraved around the edge, for justice above all. The governor's office has confirmed that Montana will achieve statehood next year, Wright continued. When that happens, we'll need a new sheriff appointed. This council unanimously recommends you, Sheriff, if you'll accept. Supportive murmurs rose from the crowd. Gaines looked at the badge, then at the faces watching him expectantly. His gaze lingered on Lily, whose encouraging smile held no expectation, only support for whatever path he chose. I'm honored by your confidence, he began slowly, but I've worn the badge for 30 years now. Perhaps it's time for younger hands to take up the burden. Surprised whispers rippled through the room. Deputy Walker has proven himself a capable lawman. With the council's approval, I'd like to recommend him as my successor when statehood comes. Walker straightened, shock giving way to determination on his face. And you, Sheriff? Wright asked. What will you do? Gaines closed the box containing the badge, his decision crystallizing with the action. I've got some land up by Silver Creek. Been meaning to build there for years. Figure it's time I finally did. His eyes met Lily's across the room. Something passed between them, a promise not yet spoken, but understood nonetheless. As the sun set that evening, Gaines stood on the porch of the sheriff's office one last time. In his pocket, his fingers closed around the old silver badge, not as a burden now, but as a chapter completed. Ahead lay unwritten pages, a future shaped not by duty alone, but by choice. And as Lily crossed the street toward him, her smile rivaling the sunset's glow, Emmett Gaines stepped forward to meet it. They say Montana winters build character, that the cold gets into a man's bones and either breaks him or makes him stronger. Looking back, I wonder if that's true of all the seasons of our lives, the storms that nearly kill us, the thaws that heal us, the new growth that follows pain. The gentle wind through pine trees carries memories of that terrible blizzard now 30 years gone. That storm changed more than the landscape around Clearwater. It reshaped lives like wind sculpts snow into new forms, revealing what was buried, covering what needed to rest. Emmett Gaines built his cabin that spring, a solid structure of pine logs and river stone that still stands today beside Silver Creek. By summer, Lily Parker had become Lily Gaines, the schoolhouse witnessing their vows, just as it had witnessed her kidnapping months before. Life has a way of coming full circle. Mason stayed on as Walker grew into his role as sheriff, the young man's Boston education balanced by the old tracker's wilderness wisdom. Together, they kept the peace through Montana's transition to statehood and beyond. And Jeb Haskell? He served his 5 years, then vanished east. Some say he found peace in knowing his father's name was finally cleared. Others claim he never truly escaped the shadow of those gallows. The truth, as always, lies somewhere between. The wind is still a living thing out here in what was once Blackthorn Hollow. It still has claws of ice in winter, still scrapes against timber with voices that sound almost human. But now I hear something else in it. Stories of ordinary courage, of promises kept against impossible odds, of healing that comes not in spite of our wounds, but because of them. In the end, perhaps that's what endures, not badges or buildings or even revenge, but the quiet determination to remain standing when the storm has passed, and to reach out a hand to those who fell.